Hello, and thank you for joining us for our presentation of The First Fallen. I'm Murtada El Fadl, programmer at NewFest, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this post-screening conversation with the writer and director of The First Fallen, Rodrigo de Oliveira. Rodrigo, welcome. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for bringing this wonderful film to the festival. We're so happy we're able to present it to our audiences. Really strong work. So congratulations first on the film. I wanted to ask you first about what was your inspiration behind this story? How did it come to you? The genesis of it.
The First Fallen is the film I wished I had seen when I was a teenager, coming out of the closet in the mid to late 90s. There's a real lack of representation about AIDS in Brazilian cinema, in Latin American cinema in general, and as I started to work on film, I came close to the idea that if I wanted to do something about my identity and my community, AIDS was the place to start, because it's very clear to me as a gay man that AIDS it's not only a subject I've come across. It's not something that I've lived. It's part of my own identity and of the identity of every LGBTQIA plus person, whether we realize it or not. The stigma and the homophobia that we live today has its core at the idea of AIDS, the idea that this thing here that we are, it's somehow transmissible. So in Brazil, in the last 5-6 years, there's been a really strong takeover of power by conservative politicians and by a conservative mind. And so there was a time when I was starting to think about the film, there was talk in Congress about conversion therapy, legalizing conversion therapy, which is something that in Brazil, it was never legal. But then it was like, that came up again. And Renata Carvalho, our actress, she was censored repeatedly with a play that she was doing, because she's a trans woman and she was playing the role of Jesus Christ, and so all these things started to make very clear to me that it was time to talk about it, and part of the problem was that it wasn't featured in Brazilian cinema before. And then, so then I started to do like research on my own, and I live in a very small state here in Brazil, Espírito Santo, Holy Spirit, again very Catholic, very conservative, and I started to go through data in my state, and I found out that the AIDS statistics they began being counted in 1985. Which is the year I was born. But in talking to people and in going through like old newspapers articles, we knew that for at least the 2 years past, we had already begun losing people to AIDS. So we as minorities, our biggest fear is to become statistics, is to become just a number. And those people in my state, about 200 of them, they couldn't even become numbers. They're out of the statistics. We don't know their names. We don't know their histories. So I thought, well, if I want to tackle this subject, and I think AIDS is such a broad subject, and there are so many other HIV/AIDS films to be made. But I thought, well, in this case, maybe if I try to go to the origin of all of this, to the first ones, and try to imagine how their life was, and try to create this the fable of their lives. Maybe we can start this conversation, and that's how it came to be.
Yeah, I love what you said about how, AIDS, we all live with AIDS, right? Like if you're queer, we are all living with it. It's something that most of us know for all of our lives. So I love that you wanted to go to the beginning, and I wanted to ask you, like, what I loved about this film, and this is like I felt this rage. Like we've been through a pandemic recently, so it's as if the old wounds are coming back again. But a lot of what I was feeling the last couple of years was this rage, and I was looking for like an expression of this rage and how it comes out, and I think you did that. Like with this film, you got that rage that we're all feeling about all these things that happen, not just the pandemic, but what you were talking about, conservative politics and going backwards in a lot of places in the world for queer people. So can you talk about sort of like the rage you feel in this film?
Yeah, it's the film is set in basically in 1983, and that's a time before the term AIDS was even invented. So these characters, they don't even have a name to put on this thing they're feeling, and yet as it was true for them then, and it's sadly still true now. The idea that because there's this thing in the world that makes our community vulnerable, and because our community is naturally taken out of history, taken out of the books, ignored and marginalized, that they would have to, and we still have to, be like our own historians, our own memorialists, our own. If there's a chance of eternity for us in this community, we have to take it up on ourselves to make it so. And for me, that's where the rage comes from. It's not the film is called The First Fall, and there's a lot of military imagery surrounding this in the film. And AIDS didn't have to be a war. Those people, they were not asking to be soldiers in a war. It could have been so much easier had the governments just said the word. In the United States, it was the same. In Brazil, the same. Reagan was first uttered the word AIDS like in '86 or something. In Brazil, it was the same. Like for 4 years, people were dying, and the government couldn't even acknowledge the existence of it. So yeah, you're struggling to survive. You're struggling to understand. Something that is very important in my film is that knowledge is survival. So these characters, they are trying to learn everything that they can to understand what's happening. But beyond that, you still have to exist in society, and you still have to be marginalized. And your body, yeah, you're sick. That body is still locked up in a cage at a hospital, and you still can be buried properly and with dignity. So this all amounts to a certain a kind of rage that is also and that has been historically true for our own community, but in Brazil specifically, concerning trans women. They if they don't yell about it, no one will listen. no one still, people still don't listen to it, but we keep on yelling, and that's I think where the rage comes from.
Yeah, somebody has to yell, and you did it with this film. I wanted to ask you, change the conversation a little bit and ask you about sort of the visual language. Like we talked about the rage, but I still feel like the way that this film sort of hits you, it comes at you in a very visceral way. Like, yes, the story, but also just the images and the visuals that you're seeing. So can you talk about how you about the visual language and how you accomplish that feeling that just hits you with the images you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it was always a film about community, and I think AIDS, and that's something the film really tries to portray. AIDS is one of those stepping stones that made us feel and understand ourselves as communities. In the case of the film, that meant to have almost all the time more than one body, face, voice in the screen, and the idea to not only to film a community, but to film what is transmitted amongst this community. Because something that was I was very aware of this. There's in AIDS films, sometimes there's that moment of transmission, which is usually like sex is had, and regret appears in the face of an actor, and it immediately brings guilt to the act of sex, and I didn't want to do that at all. But the film does tries to portray a lot of other instances of transmission of legacy, of knowledge, of love. So we were very aware of the fact that to film a community, we had to really understand how they moved about, how they interacted with each other. This is a period film, but made with a very low budget, and so we didn't. The idea of the period was never to recreate it by its aesthetic, like by the material nature of things. Like it wasn't important to get that specific object or that specific clothing, but it was like to get a feel of the time. So I gave my actors like 30 Brazilian films from 1982 to 1984. And I was talking to them like, look, watch these films, and you see that people were different. They behaved differently. They spoke differently. It's 40 years ago, and there's something there that we could capture in this idea that when the film starts, Brazil is still a military dictatorship. That's one of the problems of our response to HIV/AIDS in Brazil, and so the visuals came from that, like from this idea that there's a lot of hand touching in this film. There's a lot of passing things from one another. So this idea that to film connections, to film that thing that is usually not seen. I mean, when you film a love scene. The only thing the camera can do is film the two people that are falling in love, but love itself is something that you can't film, and we try to do that. What if instead of filming, and there's a lot of scenes like this in film, instead of filming the person on the left or on the right, we filmed the space between them. So there's like this shots that go from one character to another, and usually when one is talking, you are the camera is in him, and then you go to. But this film doesn't obey that. It's always in between. And the idea was that what's the community? It's not the individuals themselves, but the thing that is created between them. So let's try to film that.
Yeah. I love what you said. Now I have so many follow-up questions for you. First, you mentioned, I love what you said at the end about how you film the community. That's wonderful. I love this film, but it didn't really hit me that way. But now I get why I had this visceral reaction to it. It's because of what you just talked about. So you talked about your you screened some Brazilian movies from the 80s for your actors. And I wanted to ask you about sort of your inspirations. Was it those Brazilian films you also mentioned earlier, is that we as queer people have to write our own stories and tell our own stories? So where did you get your inspiration for this film, whether in how to tell the story visually or in the writing or in anything?
Yeah, the main inspiration is this French writer. His name is Hervé Guibert. He wrote a very seminal book called "To the Friend That Couldn't Save My Life." He lived with HIV, and I came across this book at a very young age. It's one of these happenstances, but in Brazil it was every bookstore had it. I don't know why. It's not a very popular book, but I came across it, and that stuck with me because it's his autobiographical portrayal of finding out the diagnosis and going through the first year of living with HIV. Hervé was a pupil of Michel Foucault, and he's this kind of intellectual with a very deep and profound heart. And then I came. I became. I mean, we as queer people, we desire these stories. So every time there was something about AIDS, and that it meant watching the complicated yet necessary Philadelphia, but also going through like a lot of French films that were talking about this subject. And How to Survive a Plague introduced me to ACT UP New York. And that led me to like reading the works of Larry Kramer and reading Vitor Russo, and then coming across Arthur Bresson Jr.'s Buddies, which to me still to this day is the best film about this subject. It's the first one out of the gate, and I still think it's the best one to tackle it. And so yeah, the inspiration it was from that, but it was also. I talked to a lot of people doing research, and I don't live with HIV myself, but I live with people with HIV, and I was always very aware of the feelings, of the sentiments, and something that I really wanted the film to be. Was in some sense to try to stage the feeling of someone getting that diagnosis. The idea, the film has a very different structure, and the film plays with timing in a very particular way. And that was always because I was talking to friends that were just diagnosed, and their idea of how time started to move after you get that piece of paper. And I was like, well, that should be in the film. Yeah, the references there are many, but mostly it was the people I was talking with and collaborating with. There's a lot of people that worked in the film that live with HIV. There's actors in the film that live with HIV, and that they were my my real inspirations.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying about building a community, and that the film shows that community. One of the moments in the film that sort of really stayed with me is when Suzano goes to the club, and there is the guy at the door, and he says to him, be happy or home, and then you go in and it's sort of like there's a community inside the club. And your film is, but one of the things, many things that are wonderful about it is that there are all these relationships, friends, lovers, intergenerational, family, chosen family. Like you said, it's about building a community. So can you talk about why it was important to show all these facets of a community in the story?
Yeah, the first drafts of the film, of the screenplay, they were very broad. They were really like panoramas of most of the characters that we still see in the film. And then I started to hone it in to those three main characters and the community around them. But this feeling of being a part of something, of a body of people, that was also very important, because it was in my town in Vitoria, where the film takes place. Vitoria is an island. Is a state capital, but is a literal island. And so Vitoria has the same population for the next for the last 80 years. There's no place for more people to live. Okay. So when I was thinking about that club in particular, this is 83. Those parties, they were clandestine. They weren't allowed by the police. So I thought, well, and I had this realization when I was filming, because we had like 200 extras, and I was staring at them, and I was like, these were probably the only 200 people in the whole city that were comfortable enough to be out of the closet in public and living in this this idea of community. And in our case, they had to be diverse, because if you think of a gay party in Brazil in the early 80s, it's black and brown people, it's poor people, and it's trans people. Those were our guides. The fact that the Rose, that Renata Carvalho is one of our main characters, a trans woman. Trans women were the ones that allowed us in those early days to come together as a community. In my city, a year after the film is set, there were already houses led by trans women, literally collecting sick gay men off the streets that were put out by their parents, and bringing them home and taking care of them. So it was very, and I had never seen that in Brazilian cinema, even though we all know it's true. And I mean, in Brazil, in my city today, and I think that's a problem everywhere. It's mainly white cis gay men in the clubs, and those and those that not only came before us, but that set the stage for us to be who we are. They are again marginalized within our community. So the idea of actually depicting not only what it was like, but who were these people, it was very important to me.
Yeah. And it shows in the films, and Renata is so wonderful in this film. And I think my last question to you, Rodrigo, because it's time for us to go in a couple of minutes. I wanted to ask you, this film has it's unflinchingly brutal about the reality of how these people lived at that time, dealing with this disease. It was unknown, but it is so hopeful. Like, even when you're watching the most difficult scenes, there is always a note of hope. And I wanted to ask you, how did you sort of blend these two together? Is telling the truth of how it really was and all of what that comes with, and this hope that just bursts through this film.
There's an episode where the way I work with actors, we do a lot of rehearsal before the film, but never the scenes in the script. We just improvise around the scenes. And very early on in the process, we were doing this scene where it's in the film, where Suzano is being massaged by Rose and Humberto. And Rose, she finds out a new Kaposi sarcoma spot in Suzano's back. And we're doing this scene. It was just for the actors to feel the movement. And then Renata says to Johnny Massaro, look, Suzano, there's a new spot. And he just says, well, welcome. And that opened up a whole new thing about what the film could be. If this guy in '83, not knowing what's happening to his body, has this idea that those spots, that those marks, that those cancerous marks are as much his own as anything else. They are part of him, so he must love him. He must love it because it's in his body. Then maybe we could spread this idea of not only hope, but also of love and acceptance without resignation. To understand what's going on and still have the rate that you talked about. So it was very important to, because it's not that life moved on, it's because it moved on in a way that we forgot about these people. So in bringing them back, we had to allow them to be as full of life and full of joy as anyone else. I mean, we say now this term that people living with HIV, it's very recent. It's because of the medication and the treatments that we have at our disposal. But people have lived with HIV since the very first case. It's just that at some point in life, death was very close to it. But from the diagnosis to the moment they died, they lived. And films about AIDS tends to be about people dying. And this, I wanted to make a film about people living. And in life, there's hope, and there's the chance of love, and there's the chance of reconnection, and there's laughter, and that was our way into the movie and the characters.
I love what you just said. You wanted to make a movie about living, and I think that's what you really accomplished with this. Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for this conversation and for bringing your film to New Fest.
Thank you, Murtada. Thank you, New Fest. It's a pleasure. It was great.
And thank you, the audience who joined us to watch this conversation. Tell your friends about New Fest. Tell your friends about The First Fallen. For more information on how to buy tickets and to tune into over 130 films featured at New Fest this year, our 34th edition, both in person in New York and virtually, please visit newfest.org.